Tony Charlton is the last link to the birth of football on television in Australia. Charlton, a sprightly 83, is a giant of sports broadcasting in this country. He has graciously agreed to reflect upon 60 years at the front line of media coverage of various sports, including football. Welcome to Open Mic, Tony, and I am suitably humbled. Pleasure to have you on. It is genuinely a pleasure to be in front of you.
Thank you, Mike. The mountains Tony, come to Muhammad.
I wish that were true. There's not much you haven't seen and done since you joined forces with the legendary Norman Banks at 3AW in 1952. It's been a great journey, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and I feel privileged. I think Providence was at work there. Yes, a seismic shift occurred in radio at that time. There was no television. Norman Banks left 3KZ and came to 3AW.
So there was poaching even back then, was there?
Yes. 3AW in those days was a music and racing station. Ever since Norman Banks arrived, it's been a talk and football station.
What did Norman Banks say to you when he decided to sort of take you on as his, I suppose, lieutenant almost?
Well, what a privilege. I had no idea. He just took to me, and to celebrate his arrival at 3AW, a football match was covered. It happened to be the Essendon-Richmond game with fearsome rain, where, under lights, if you could call it that, at the showgrounds. Mm-hmm. The showgrounds was lit as a trotting track where they played the game. It was a sort of dull sepia. Yeah. And I didn't appreciate then that Norman Banks had eyesight problems. When the play came close to him, he took over the call. When they disappeared into the gloom, he handed over to the kid. Death by 1,000 cuts. I nearly died that night.
So Banks had called football at KZ, had he not?
That's right.
But it was your first game?
My first game.
There wouldn't have been any broadcast booths like we've got now. I mean, open air?
Almost. They were, it was primitive. Right up through early television years. I mean, when I see what the facilities are today for broadcasters, I'm green with envy.
It was 60 years ago.
Yes.
Now, you're a member of the Sport Australia, MCG and Australian Football Halls of Fame. Why don't you simply sit back in state at the MCG and nod to your subjects on big match days?
Like being involved and have the energy to do it, and I hope it continues for a few more years.
I love your description of the fundamental role of a commentator. To produce words like bubbles in champagne. Literally, I do. I think it's a beautiful description of what we try to do.
Well,
is that your own?
It is an art form. I trust it is. Didn't know I'd said that, but you've picked up on it. I trust that's what it is. And the art of a pause. I think I learnt that from Stuart McPherson, that marvellous Canadian sports commentator who made a fortune at the BBC in the early days, calling Empire title fights like Sands on the ropes and gets off quick. Mm-hmm. I really was attracted to his style, and that was a point that he made. Learn the art of a pause.
Multiple Olympic Games and 12 grand finals. Yeah. Is football, where does football rank with track and field and the Olympic sports in your life?
Very highly. It's such a religion here, isn't it? It's marvellous to be a part of it, to have the privilege of being mixed up in it to whatever degree. I've never forgotten the feeling, having arrived as a youth from Perth, going to the MCG for the first time, totally absorbed by the sounds and the size of the crowd and the reactions of the crowd. I mean, Greg Baum was right when he so beautifully wrote the theatre of the great and grand, and that's what it is. So I've loved my football association. One
of your many experiences makes me both curious and envious. You watched the great John Coleman play. You've said to me many times that he's the best footballer you've seen, and you don't even consider it a contest. Is that true?
That is true. And I'd have many who would support me in that. Unfortunately, many of us are falling off the twig. But Bill Jacobs, for example, a marvellous sports caller and Intersport, died in the Wolf Fitzroy man. He joined the Essendon Football Club specifically so that he could watch Coleman and would move from end to end. And I can fully understand that. He was magical. I mean, he was the first league player to get 100 goals in his first year. He made the state team in his first year. He averaged 5.5 goals every match. He kicked 10 goals 6 times, 9 goals 3 times, 8 goals 5 times, but and so on it went.
Locken and Dunstall have those sort of figures in terms of kicking big goals, and Peter Hudson, big goals in games. I asked you once to prove to me or tell me why Coleman was better than Wayne Carey, who's the best player I've seen, and you almost sort of treated it with contempt. I mean, he must have been. You've seen lots of, and one thing you've always been a modernist. I mean, you always think that the sport of the day is probably better than it's ever been played. Why then does he stand supreme in the field?
Simply because he was. The things he was able to do. He was a very good ground player. He used to tell Ted Lehane, who was full forward in the 42 premiership side, centre half forward in the 49 premiership side, just kick it in front of me. Just kick it in front of me. Well, but the acrobatic leap was just extraordinary. Gary Ablett Senior, wonderful. And I don't wish to denigrate any of these great players.
Are you saying he went higher than Ablett?
Oh, God. He'd jump over that roof.
Is there a romantic notion about things that happened 50 years ago? Or you're happy with your recall about all the things that he did?
Yes, I am, and thank you for the challenge of that. I sought the opinion of John Kennedy, tall, angular, good ruckman, awkward to play against, and of course, marvellous reputation as both coach and a servant of the game through being chairman of the league commissioners. He told me, Tony, if you wanted to win a game, I think I would choose Lee Matthews, who was one of the 4 football icons at the MCG. But if you wanted the most spectacular player I ever saw by far, it was John Coleman. And he went on to tell me that he had never experienced before something that happened at Glenferrie Oval one day. Said Coleman came from behind the pack, went straight over him. He was tall and, as I say, angular, took the ball cleanly and landed in front of the pack on his feet. He said, I'd never seen that before.
John Kennedy said that, did he?
Yeah, and I referred that to Jeff Leake, who got into commentary through me and served 25 years calling the games. Dear Jeff, with us no longer. He said he did that every night at training.
Okay, I defer. I bow to you on that. I mean, I never saw Coleman. You actually called the last game. It was John Coleman's 98th game of football. He was a legend, heartthrob. He fell over and hurt his knee and never played again.
2-out affair. Jock McCorkle was the fullback for North Melbourne. It was at Windy Hill. They were racing out, Coleman in the lead. There was a tumble, grabbed his knee, never played again. But then I had the experience of introducing him in his first public appearance after that tragedy. It was, for the whole community, football community, it was like there was a death in the family. And this was pre-television days. A very big thing in radio was Kiora Sports Parade.
Yeah, I remember it. I listened to it.
And I used to MC that, following Norman Banks and then Doug Elliott. So nobody could have anticipated the reaction of the crowd. It was the Melbourne Town Hall, it was Essendon's night, the place was absolutely packed to the rafters. And on introduction, he stood there, this Adonis, on crutches, knee heavily bandaged, which was the way of it then, and they stomped and hollered and applauded and shouted and cried for 7 minutes before we could get the show going again. That was the power of Coleman. He was magic.
So he was a rock star?
Absolutely.
You know, if he's finished at 98, I think he started at 18.
Yes.
He's 24 or something when he's finished, is that right?
Yeah.
Were you aware of the story, Tony, that Coleman's knee wasn't sufficiently serious to end a career, that he just chose to give it away after that injury?
No, I don't think medical science was up to the standards that we take for granted today. I think he would have played again in a year's time. Give you another indication of his magnificence. This was told to me recently at Don Mackenzie's place. John Burt, twice best of field in grand finals for Essendon, marvellous player, number 11, little Johnny. He said that Coleman hadn't played for 6 years, was coaching Essendon and teaching the new full forward some of the tricks of the trade. There were 10 kickouts by the fullback. Coleman marked 8 of them.
Blighty would say that he did the same sort of thing when he coached. But do you see any of John Coleman in James Hird? I mean, I do, and I'm only dealing from the memories that I have of Coleman and what I've heard. But this sort of outstanding player, born to be a coach, a bit reluctant to come back, finally does, and makes a success of it.
Yeah, marvellous figure of the time. You make me think of the more bizarre side of football, because he fits into that category for me. There were 72 chances for clubs to get him before Essendon did. That was how it played out in those times.
Tony Charlton's Football Show.
Now, you even had your own sports program on Channel 9 in the 60s.
Yes.
Head-to-head with World of Sport and Ron Casey?
With Ron Casey, yes. Yeah, they were willing encounters. It's a regret of mine, that wonderful fella. We only used to see each other when sidekicked, me to Fred Tupper, he to Eric Welsh at the wrestling at West Melbourne Stadium. We used to get involved in that. Then we got involved in television, and I'm sure he was the same. I only had 2 days off in 3 years, I think. The application was pretty intense, and we hardly ever saw each other except at sports occasions.
Was there a competitive edge?
Yes, there was, yeah. And I think you'd have to say that he had a stellar career.
He did.
Yeah,
as you have. I want to ask you about Norm Smith. Obviously, we can't have an interview with Tony Charlton and not raise the name of Norm Smith.
Yeah.
You did a one-on-one interview with him in 1965, which is probably the most dramatic football news event in the history of television, I suspect. Let me set the scene, Tony. It's mid-season 1965. Melbourne is 9-3 after 12 rounds, having won its first 8 games. Melbourne was the defending premier from 1964, and Melbourne had won 6 premierships in 10 years.
Correct.
Norm Smith gets the sack. Take up the story from there.
Oh, it was unbelievable. Just an extraordinary thing. I mean, it was impossible. I mean, people were in shock about that. What? Norm Smith's sack? Just couldn't be. But it was, and the president of the club at the time, Dr. Don Duffy, said this had been brewing for some time. Norm could be very autocratic. I understood that side of it, and he wanted things his way. In running a club, not always can that be, but he was on a matter of principle as far as this was concerned.
The principle being?
Well, I'm trying to remember his quote, and I think I can. They went to a public school, I went to a state.
You went to a public school, I went to a state school, I said, but they still spelt principle the same way. And it's the principle for which I am fighting. I was brought up that way. Len was brought up that way. And if you haven't got principle, you haven't got anything. And I've got principle, and I'll fight for this principle to the day I die.
It was an amazingly powerful interview that you had with him.
Well, it was amazing.
Did you need to
because
coerce
of him
into doing that?
No, he was true to his word. I mean, he had offers for substantial money of the time to give his story elsewhere. But as he was part of the channel I was with and our football show, man of principle, he resisted that and saved it for the Sunday in the sports show.
It was unacceptable to me that I could work with men who wouldn't back me, men who would expect me to get the utmost from the players and demand from the players the loyalty and support, and at the other end of the line were not prepared to give me their support. That's where it started.
What repercussions, Norm, do you expect this whole episode to have within the club?
The repercussions I would like it to have is that every Melbourne Football Club supporter and every Melbourne Cricket Club supporter registers a protest in the strongest terms at the way it's been handled. Get rid of these blokes. That's the only way the club will progress. I have told the president, I have told the secretary, I spoke to them as friends. I said, look, the club's slipping. This has been used again. I'm undermining them. I can see something happening that nobody else can see. I spoke to Ronnie this morning. He can see it. He could see it happening. Everyone can see it happening, but the fools who run it.
Were you nervous doing that interview with Norm Smith?
Yes, I was, because the tension was extremely high. And his wife, Marge, she was wonderful support to him. She was just off camera in tears as this developed, and that upset me greatly.
You know, these days we're totally driven by ratings.
Yes.
Was that relevant back then? I mean, was
absolutely, yeah.
Your discussion with him was friend to friend,
yeah.
and a dramatic event, no doubt about that. But did you see the sort of the commercial reality in it too, that you had the interview that everyone wanted?
Yes, I did, and of course, extremely grateful to him for resisting the opportunities that he had for far greater money to give an interview elsewhere. It certainly was a very dramatic time, just a marvellous man, and the sport lost a hero when he passed on.
We're talking about this man, again, 6 premierships in 10 years. What sort of impact did it have on the community?
Well, you're a noted sports journalist. You would appreciate this more than most, but it was reported and took the first 4 pages of the Sun News pictorial on the Monday morning.
Do you give any credence to the theory that the Norm Smith curse has been imposed upon the Melbourne Football Club because of events back in the 60s? They haven't won a premiership since, and so many people now believe that's how they treated Norm Smith that's caused the fate.
No, I don't subscribe to that view.
What do you think's gone wrong with your football club?
Well, it's a totally different era. I mean, it's
a totally different era for everyone.
Yes, the complexities of it, and the critical nature of getting the talent, the recruiting of the right people. just doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly hasn't happened for Melbourne for a far too long period.
He died at 57. Must have been a huge shock. I mean, we blokes are still coaching post 57.
Yes.
What happened?
Oh, I think it was heart failure. Visited him out at Moreland at Sacred Heart Hospital out there a couple of times, but the family were pretty tight-lipped about that. You didn't talk about those things in these days. I'm sure it was his heart. Subsequently, it might be proved that's not accurate, but I think that is right.
Do you think he was heartbroken, Tony? He ended up at South Melbourne.
Broke his heart.
It did it?
Yeah, we got them back together, played a small part in that, got him back to Melbourne, but the twain never met. It was never the same again. The trust was gone. So he went off to South Melbourne subsequently, as you know.
After the break, Tony, let's talk about the modern game. You broadcast 12 grand finals for Channels 7 and 9.
Yeah.
They included St Kilda's only premiership win.
Yes.
And
Harry Breen.
Carlton's amazing fight back in 1970.
Yeah. 7 goals. Fantastic.
Yeah. Which, does one stand out for you?
Yes, that one.
The Carlton fight back?
Match, yes. The fight back. Terrific.
When did you sense that things had changed? I mean, 44 points should be an insurmountable lead in a grand final.
Yeah.
Do you remember sort of standing there and thinking the momentum swung here?
Well, it swung dramatically right from the bounce of the ball for the second half. That's where they made up the leeway.
The Saints, they still only have one flag. You mentioned Barry Breen kicking the winning point.
Yeah.
He's still a hero at St Kilda. Alan Jeans, who we lost recently, the coach. Mm-hmm. There must have been a massive outpouring of emotion then when the Saints finally broke through.
Yeah, there was. Extraordinary. Just extraordinary. Marvellous relationships within that side, and you've got to have those. All successful sides, I believe, have that element. They were a close-knit unit, and boy, they fought it out to the last, and it was nip and tuck, as the result proved.
Tell us about the footy back then. What's your memory of how the game was played?
Oh, totally different. I mean, it's
totally different?
Oh, totally different. Everything's changed. From the size of the goalposts to the size of the ball, the configuration of the centre circle, coaches coaching from benches on the ground, just amazing changes. The strips, everything else, the boots.
Which is the better game, the current game or the game played in the 60s and 70s?
Oh, when you get to this age, you tend to look in the rear vision mirror rather than through the windscreen. I loved the game for the magnificent attractions it had in those days. Stab passing, drop kicking, torpedo punts. We spoke of Coleman before, those fantastic 60-yarders.
No, don't tell me again. He was the best kick of his time too, was he?
But the hand passing today is just as miraculous. I mean, they're just geniuses, the way they get the ball out and into the hands of players running past or at close range. I mean, they're so onto it.
It hasn't been just football, has it? I mean,
no.
How many Olympics?
Oh, 7, I think. Yeah.
7?
Yeah.
I think 7 Olympics.
Yeah.
I can remember firsthand your call of Betty Cuthbert in Tokyo in 64.
Yes.
When she won the medal, I think 8 years after she'd won her earlier gold medals.
That's right. Was wiped off as having no chance because she was injured right up till the last, and they forced her to give a trial, which she wanted to avoid because she knew she was suspect. She wanted the extra time. What a brave girl. Marvellous lady.
What were you like at the track?
I was very nervous about it, and she was just terrific.
Geez, you've interviewed some big names, haven't you? I mean, not just sport. Did you interview Harold Wilson when he was Prime Minister of England?
Yes, I did. Yes,
how'd that come
Bobby
about?
Kennedy and just by direct approach.
Did you have a show then that was?
Yes, an interview program after the movie on Sunday night. It was the best thing I did, I think, in the media.
Really?
I was very fortunate.
Yeah.
Sounds boastful, and I would hate to be taken that way, but it was sort of Parkinson's show. So anybody who came here was sort of on that show.
So where did you get Bobby Kennedy?
By rolling up to Capitol Hill in Washington and standing there
on the
all
door
day
with your recording equipment
in the portico. Yes, and the Vietnam debate was on. And he's in the house all day, and they said, "Well, wait here, wait." Must have waited 7 or 8 hours. Out he came, grabbed him.
So what did you say? I'm Tony Charlton from Australia.
Americans are very polite people. Yeah, he was gracious. Yes, and fired a couple of difficult questions for him to answer, but he handled them.
Did he ask for a DVD? Gregory Peck, the famous actor, he was part of your stable?
Well, yes, but just by the chance of me working with the film unit. Wonderful bloke.
Yeah.
Had a bit to do with him here, sat in his caravan with him while he was reading books for his next film assignment and whatnot else. And then dined with him at his home, he and Veronique in Brentwood, one of the upper-class suburbs of Hollywood, yeah.
Tell me the art of interviewing, Tony.
Oh, well, I think you've got it.
No, I'm just learning it.
Keep the questions short and listen to the answers.
Your history with 7 and 9, I remember in an interview you did some years ago, you talked about the TV rights in the 60s.
Yes.
And you were aghast at the then VFL's request for, I think, £2,000 a year. Is that correct?
You have done your research, and that's absolutely right. And Keith Cairns, who came out of the Herald in Flinders Street and was managing Channel 7 in its early years, started to get very agitated about this at Harrison House, where the deal was done. Sir Kenneth Luke is chairing the meeting, Eric McCutcheon taking over and say, this is how it will be. So we can't possibly afford that. So Keith Cairns, we can't possibly afford that.
That's $4,000 in today's terms. We talked about the commentators before and your tip for how to do an interview and to be a commentator.
Yeah.
Who are the ones that you like most? If you're watching a game of football, and who do you think does it best?
I think as the game has grown, commentary has grown with it. I mean, Dennis Cometti is a marvellous caller. So is Tim Lane. Bruce McAvaney, just without question, marvellous fellow. I mean, he lifted Olympic Games coverage to a degree internationally had not been known before. What a gifted man. And so on it goes.
Do they talk too much, do you think? The commentators as a group?
The tendency is to do that because probably too many are sharing the microphone. But I get a great kick out of it, as I have out of what you've done and Robert Walls, and I see it now in Mick Malthouse.
Expert comments, you think he's as good as there is?
Yes, yeah. But no better than you and Robert Walls, who remain my favourites.
Thank you, Tony.
Well, that's true.
To borrow from your vernacular, what's been your finest hour in 60 years in this business?
Surviving it, I think.
No, but there must be some special moments that you cherish. We all do. There are certain things that we do that we think that's as good as we can do it.
Well, I've enjoyed doing the Prime Minister's Olympic dinner over the years since its formation in 1980. They've been big nights, raised a lot of money for the Olympic movement, in which I believe, and I hope I've played a role there. I think probably most of all the dawn service is important to me. My father was in the forces in World War I. I've accounted for that. I have strong memories during wartime in Perth when we were sure we were going to be invaded and we were scared out of our wits. As a kid in short pants, I remember going to my first dawn service in Kings Park and feeling the atmosphere of that, surrounded by guys in duffel coats and slouch hats, and heavens knows what happened to them in the course of the war. The dawn service is a very important thing, and it's very stimulating to see the crowds now drawn to it at the Shrine in Melbourne, up to 40,000. Hail, rain or shine, we've got wet through this time.
Tony, let's talk technology for a moment. The Fox Footy has 20 cameras at most games. How many cameras were you working with back in 57?
Great cumbersome things, yes. 2 for a major game, 1 for the secondary game.
Right? Yeah.
And had 1 zoom lens in the entire place. Look at it today, it's an absolute wonderment, and I'm uplifted by it. Just the capacity of the technology today is amazing.
How would you improve production at 7 and Fox on what we're doing these days?
I wouldn't have the temerity to suggest anything. I think the slow motion, the graphics, everything else, the replays, the angles, just magnificent. And we take it all for granted. As John F. Kennedy said, we've lost our capacity for wonderment.
Your bucket list, we've all got one.
Yeah.
I'm not hastening your departure from this planet, but are there things that you want to do that you've still got on your list?
Yes, to continue flying. Flying's been a great interest of mine, and the fly around this country, which I've done many times, is a constant joy. It's just such a marvellous place, and aren't we lucky to have it? And I only hope that's my bucket list that we can hold on to it.
There was one flight that you didn't enjoy particularly much. You went to the Northern Territory.
Yes. Got these symptoms and didn't know what in the hell had happened because I was full of energy and eating well and regular and all of those things, no bleeding, no nothing. Get back here, made a good decision there. One of my few said there's something wrong with me, left the plane there for somebody from here to get it, take it back to Moorabbin, and went into hospital and bowel cancer and given not much hope of existing more than a couple of months. Well, seemed to have dodged a bullet. Leaves you wondering why. Why would I dodge a bullet if that's in fact what happens? When Jim Steins does such good work in the community, half my age goes out the back door. I don't understand that.
We're only talking 2 and 3 years ago, are we not?
Yeah, 1 year ago.
1 year ago?
Yeah, less.
Yeah. Was it?
This week, in fact.
Is that right, the 12-month anniversary?
Yeah.
When you came back from the Northern Territory, you didn't know what was wrong, you knew something was serious.
Yeah, and they said it can happen this way.
And when you got the diagnosis, how do you? What were your in your 80s? Is it fatalistic, or do you say, "Well, I'm going to beat this"? What attitude did you have?
I said I'm going to beat it, but I also had in the back of my mind they've had a pretty good innings, and you can't complain because many people have had far worse things happen to them and had a far shorter lifespan. Look at those who served us, and lie in every battlefield across the world.
Regrets?
None.
None. There's not one thing that you would do differently in your life?
No, I'd like to look like Gregory Peck. Look at me, look like Methuselah.
I thought you did. I didn't know who I was talking to today. Tony, there's lots of people would be saying that you and I should be sitting there practising our bingo numbers.
Yes.
But I think it's important. I'm really pleased that you came on. I think there's a history lesson there for all of us. For me, it's been a great walk down memory lane. I love what you've done. Always love catching up with you, and good luck for the future.
Gracious of you. Thanks, Mike.
This has been a Fox Footy production.